What's up, about class? Mr. Yago hitting on section 5 on sexual reproduction. I'm going to take you through this unit, hit on a few things that are important for what we've been talking about in terms of meiosis and genetics, and then it'll be kind of a precursor for our week, our big topics this week. We're going to talk about childbirth in the Nova video and have our reproduction panel where it's open to questions. So, it's a big week. And if you got any questions as we progress, don't hesitate to ask. So here are your learning targets today. Hopefully by the end of this video you can understand the structure and function of the male reproductive system as well as the female reproductive system. You should be able to describe the process of fertilization, implantation, and the prenatal development, which is development as the baby is in the womb. And also understand a little bit about how multiple births work. So let's start out with sexual development. So what we're looking at right now is, you are in mama's tummy, and we're looking at the first 6 weeks of what we classify as prenatal development. So, human male and female embryos are actually identical in appearance to the first 6 weeks. So there's no possible way that you can determine gender of a 6-week-old baby. Usually after about 6 weeks, internally mainly, females develop ovaries and males develop testes. So, usually they say the rule of thumb is about 12 weeks when you can really determine what's in that tummy. But from 6 to 12 weeks, it's kind of tough, although, the gender is pretty much determined already. A lot of times people always say you start out as a girl because everything, is very internal, and before it differentiates to kind of that external plumbing for guys, that's where we start. So what really kicks off this process, of developing our major difference between males and females, which honestly is our reproductive systems. Our lungs are the same, our hearts are the same, brains are the same. This is what differentiates us. And it all deals with the hormones. We have glands in our body. They're tissue glands that basically release these hormones into our blood. And if you know anything about blood sends stuff everywhere. So when we're talking about these hormones, we're talking about testosterone and estrogen. And in males, testosterone is the major hormone that is going to begin this process of developing the testes, whereas estrogen, starts developing the ovaries. And these hormones help develop sexual organs. However, the reproductive cells are not created until we hit puberty. Okay, so the equipment is there, and as we're growing and developing, it's there when you're born, and as you age in preparation for puberty, that's when we actually hit a period of rapid growth. That's what puberty means. It's rapid growth in sexual maturation where the reproductive system becomes fully functional. So what prompts this rapid growth? Well, it's right here. It's the hormones. So, for females, usually they are going to go through this process first. If you look back to middle school, if you go back to middle school now, especially in that 6th and 7th and 8th grade, the girls are taller than the guys. You notice that in terms of maturity, and that is a word we use loosely, but in most cases, girls are a little bit more mature than the guys. And then once we get into 8th, 9th grade, that's when we start seeing, puberty for the guys really hit. Now, that is just an age range. There's a lot of research that's now saying that females are going through puberty earlier, having periods as early as, 7, 8 years old. And for guys, it's usually later. So that rapid growth is purely from a high secretion of of testosterone in males and estrogen in females. What happens then is we have full functionality of the reproductive system. So after puberty, the sperm is available and viable is the word we use, and then the ovaries are dropping eggs, and women start going through their menstrual cycle once a month. So let's start out with the guys. Male reproductive system, obviously the major function is to produce as well as deliver sperm. Off to the right, you can see we have a diagram of the male reproductive system. Some things to bring to your attention, obviously, in the scrotum we have the testicles, and these testicles are where sperm is produced as well as stored. And that is kind of external to the body, so to speak, which causes a few things of concern. One thing is that temperature is really, really important, and it needs to be about 1 to 3 degrees cooler for proper production and storage of sperm. So majority of our bodies are 98.6, and when we look at what sperm need to be at, they need to be a little bit lower temperature. So guys will especially be able to attest to this, that it is very sensitive to temperature, and if you don't maintain that, your sperm will die, which biologically, without you having to think about it, your body's going to take care of that. Okay, so without talking too much over here, when sperm are being used, they are going to travel up this called a vas deferens, and they actually will intersect with the same tube that your bladder functions. So when we look at ejaculation of sperm, that is going to be going down the same tube as urine would go down. So that's unique to guys. We'll talk about that later. So one major reflex that guys will have, and this is a reflex that basically speaks to managing that temperature. So although this is not something that we do to manage the temperature of the testicles, this is a reflex that inhibits the same response, or exhibits the same response. So it's a reflex in males that helps maintain the temperature inside the scrotum. So it can easily be tested by stroking the inner thigh, like you have here, and this will actually cause the scrotum to retract, which moves up. That would then mean that this reflex is stating that the temperature is getting too cold, and the sperm are not being able to support life, so we bring them up closer to the body, and that will actually warm them up. Whereas the opposite end, if it's getting too warm, the testicles will retract and be exposed to the outer air more and then cool down. But this reflex is something that they just test to ensure that this system is working properly. Definitely not something you need to worry about at your age unless you get an injury to that area, but as you age, it's something that is tested. So let's pop over to the female reproductive system. What you're looking at is not only the vagina, but as well as the uterus and the fallopian tubes that branch off to either ovaries. Most females, if born and developed properly, will have 2 ovaries. Usually an egg will drop down from each side every other month. So it might go left, right. And the major function of the female reproductive system is to produce ova, or eggs. In contrast, females only produce 1 egg per month compared to males, which produce on average 1 million sperm. So it's very, very important. That's why biologically females have internal plumbing, because you have 1 egg. You produce 1 egg a month. And as you see below, although females are born with thousands of eggs, only about 400 of them will be released in their lifetime. So the window for females to reproduce is smaller, and the viability of reproducing is a higher risk. Okay, so when you look at that's looking at it from a female standpoint, that's 400 menstrual cycles. That's a lot. A lot of eggs that are being dropped. So eggs are released from the ovaries. So ovaries are up here. And they will travel down the fallopian tube, and we'll talk about later about if they do become fertilized, where that happens and how that proceeds. But this is specific to females. As you can see, we're dealing with egg production, and a lot more sperm in males than there are in egg. So let's talk a little bit about fertilization. With sexual reproduction, it's not asexual. It requires 2 different gametes, sperm in males, egg in females. But once an egg is dropped in the fallopian tube, and I'm going to kind of pop down to this image over here. Here would be anatomically the right ovary. so I know it's the left side of the picture, but in body, this would be the right ovary. And this is where these eggs are stored. One would be dropped. Sperm will actually travel up the vagina through the cervix into the uterus, okay? And most sperm will travel then up the fallopian tubes, and as you can see here, a lot of times that egg will be fertilized in the fallopian tubes. It can be fertilized here, it can be fertilized there, but the ideal location is there. When we look at, once an egg is dropped, we look on average, males will have on average about 3 to 5 milliliters of semen, which contains millions of sperm. Now that number will vary. It can vary by a bunch of factors. Some are genetic, some are environmental, some with age. But 3 to 5 milliliters of semen contains about 1 million sperm, and those 1 million sperm are all traveling up in through the uterus, up the fallopian tubes in search of that egg. Now, how do they know to go there? Probability. And random, it's just random. They're just traveling. They have a flagella, as you can see, that causes them to move, and they just travel. Some research says that there are chemical signals when an egg is in the area, and those chemical signals will be used to guide the sperm. But upon fertilization, so only one of those sperm is going to make it and wiggle through the lining of the egg. The egg will immediately create an external barrier, and this is fascinating because you don't want more sperm to come in, because if you do, instead of recombining that 23 to 46 diploid chromosome, you are now adding more. You are adding another 23 or however many sperm enter. So this is a biological thing. It creates an external barrier, prevents further sperm from entering, which I think is just fascinating. And after this process, our whole goal, why we have to go through sexual reproduction, is both sperm and egg are haploid. They have 23 chromosomes, half the set. We need to reconstitute that diploid 46 chromosomes in humans. So upon fertilization, we do that. You have now achieved and created one cell. That's your very first cell. That's how you started when sperm met egg. And from there, we begin going through the process of mitosis. So once the egg is fertilized, it begins going through mitosis, as I just said, exponentially. One cell becomes 2 cells become 4 cells become 8, and so on and so forth. Down at the bottom, I have this process, Day one, what we classify as a fertilized egg is really a zygote. As you can see, the progression, after day 4 or 5, we classify it as a morula, day 5 or 6, a blastocyte, and then so on and so forth. So we're just making cells. We really haven't differentiated yet. When we talked about that in previous chapters, where we differentiate cells into a liver and a skin, that happens a little bit later. But once the cell travels down the fallopian tubes, it implants into the wall of the uterus. And this is what you're seeing here. So this is a mom who's definitely, down the line, I'd say probably 35, 40 weeks, so almost full term. When you become pregnant, the body goes through a lot of changes. And the baby, is filling a space and basically rearranges the mother's internal organs. Stomach gets pushed up, bladder gets pushed over, a lot of stuff gets moved, okay? But the placenta is a bag. So there's a bag of fluid, and it has an attachment site into the uterus. And that's where that umbilical cord is going to feed into. So once a cell travels down the fallopian tubes, it's going to implant. It's basically just going to drop into the wall, and the wall is kind of going to absorb it, and it's going to begin forming blood vessels, which we classify as the umbilical cord, which you could see right here. So we have that fetal surface. That umbilical cord, as you can see, I'm pointing on the top right, comes all the way down and goes right into your belly button. The baby does not breathe with its lungs because it's filled with fluid in there. So oxygen as well as CO2 is going to travel out of there. Nutrients from what you eat, wastes, will all travel in and out of that. Okay, and that's once that egg is now implanted. Okay, when we look at post-birth, this is what you see. And this is an alive, healthy baby. Although this looks gross, that's the placenta. So that is what was implanted into the wall. You can see the umbilical cord coming off and going all around into the belly. You have a bunch of mucus and stuff that's covering the baby as protective. It's kind of a cheesy substance, but so that protects the baby, so they clean them all off, and we'll cut the umbilical cord. But sometimes, and I know with my little guy, baby was born, they pulled him out. My wife went through a second labor, and actually what they classify give birth to placenta, because sometimes that will come out second, so you actually have to give birth twice, kind of. It's kind of crazy. This is an interesting slide, and the reason I put this up here is, with modern technology, you have lots of apps that talk to you about when you're pregnant, what it means, what this week means, what's happening. And what I want to just show you is, some of the things that I went through with our baby, and it's kind of fun every week because as the baby is growing and developing, especially early, you don't really see anything. The belly doesn't really get big. You don't feel any kicking until after 25 weeks or 20 weeks, and it's kind of weird being pregnant. So I'm going to hit you with some of the major things that are developing and what the size ratio is. And off to the right, it's a very interesting chart, so you can just see these are all weeks, and these are all comparisons to fruits and vegetables, which is most common. My wife's app, it was like, hey, your baby's the size of a pomegranate today. Wow, that's crazy. But week 6, brain, heart, spinal cord are developing. You're the size of a pomegranate seed. So pomegranate seed, pretty small. Week 10, the eyes of the baby develop. You're about the size of a cutie, so a little orange. Week 14, the digestive tract is pretty much ready to rock. Intestines, stomach, liver, you name it. And the baby's the size of a peach. So after 14 weeks, it's the size of a peach. So 14 weeks is, approximately 3.5 months, somewhere in that range. Usually full term is 9 months. As you can see, week 21, baby can sense touch and vibration. So they start to interact with their environment. They can feel the fluid they're in. They're going to start kicking on the tummy and sensing that. And in terms of length, they're about the length of a carrot. So just to give you an idea of where they're at size-wise. So baby's getting pretty big at 20 weeks. I would say definitely mom will be showing. You'll see a little bit of a baby bump at that time. Week 25, acorn squash. Baby can reach, grab. They're going to pull on their umbilical cord. They're going to kick around, really start to understand sensation as to their surroundings, and be very playful. It's very common for, especially at night when you're trying to sleep, the baby's running around inside that tummy and doing all backflips pretty much. Week 30, baby begins to start regulating sleep. So you might notice moments where the baby doesn't move at all, and then you might have times where the baby's just going crazy. About the size of a cabbage, getting pretty big. So week 30, mom's pretty big. Week 35, the head begins to drop. So it's the goal for the head to come out first. Okay, if not, you might be looking at a C-section, which we'll talk about. But week 35, we got a cantaloupe, and then week 40, sometimes the size of a watermelon. My little guy was 9 pounds, 22.5 inches. That's a big baby. Get a chance, tonight, over the next couple of days, ask mom and dad how big you were. They'll remember. Mama will remember, that's for sure. But that's full term, 40 weeks, and that's about when, you should be ready to get that baby out of your tummy. So kind of interesting. Feel free to peruse this. So like I said, a lot of apps out there kind of keep today's mothers informed. Woohoo, childbirth. Childbirth ain't what it was, years ago. I think you talked to a lot of your parents. Epidurals and pain management was just starting to come about. But when you get to that full term, female body starts releasing a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is a natural hormone that actually starts causing muscle contractions of the uterus, which is what begins this process of giving birth. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's quick. It all depends, but the whole goal is to get the baby out. As I said before, the baby's head should be first as it exits through the uterus, the cervix, and out the vagina. If the baby is not cooperating or they're worried about, the umbilical cord being wrapped around their neck or something along those lines, they might move to a cesarean section, which we classify as a C-section. They make a small incision on the kind of bottom portion of the belly, and they'll just pull that baby out. They can have that baby out in minutes, literally minutes, probably seconds if they're prepared, if they need to. So they definitely are monitoring the baby as well as the mother, and if now they sense any problems, blood pressure dropping, heart rate dropping, they will definitely get that baby out. So last thing I want to talk about is multiple births. We discussed it a little bit in my class, I know, but sometimes more than one baby develops during pregnancy. Fraternal twins would be a great example. We got some fraternals down here. They can be same or different sexes. Here's 2 girls, not identical, as you can see, but they are twins. What happens is 2 eggs are released with 2 sperm fertilizing. So 2 eggs of different genetic varieties and 2 sperm of different genetic varieties. So yes, they are sisters. Yes, they were born on the same day, most likely. Yes, they are twins, but they are not identical. Whereas identical twins, as you can see, we got two identical babies, cuties, little boys, and then two identical grannies. They came out like that. Just kidding. The zygote will actually split into two identical twins. So what happens is the two cells split, you know, when you just fertilize that zygote and they don't stick together. It's crazy. And then they will, you know, separate apart and they will go through. And a lot of people are like, well, isn't something going to be disrupted? Well, if you split one cell, it's an exact identical copy of that first cell. So there's no differentiation. You haven't developed anything yet. And those two cells will go off and they will implant. This most likely happens in the fallopian tubes, but this will always develop the same sex. You cannot have identical twins with different sexes, as far as I know. Cool. So that's it. That's our section. Like I said, it's kind of a raw introduction into a little bit on how sexual reproduction works in terms of our system. So I have some questions here. Like I said, I'm not going to go through the answers, but these are some questions to ask yourself just to make sure that you really understood what happened in this unit. As always, we should have a week full of questions, so feel free if you have anything you want to ask. You know, just contact your local biology teacher and we'll do our best to answer your questions. Have a wonderful day, and we'll catch you on the Flippy Floppy. Yago out.